So I'm going to move you guys over to my other screen so we can get started. Hello. So as people are filtering in, I'm going to answer some questions that people sent in when they registered. So let me share my screen. Okay, can everyone see my screen okay? Okay, great. So some of the questions people sent in, one was about comments. So if you can leave comments like you can in like some other products like on a cell or on a table. So we don't have comments yet. It is something that's on a roadmap, though I don't have a time frame for it. But here's some workarounds. One is just having a table that is related to where you want to leave comments. So for example, here, somebody can leave a new comment, and then using trigger formulas, you can timestamp a name at a time. So you can do it this way. You can use a notepad that is also linked to a table if you want to have rich text, if you want to have images, or you can use Markdown. And the benefit of Markdown is that then the Markdown is also right in the cell like this, which you don't get with the notepad, because this is like what you see is what you get kind of notepad. Oh, is there a problem with the screen share? Looks okay on my end. No problem with the screen share? Is it just John? Okay. Okay. Okay, great. So that's one way to work around the limitation of not having comments yet. Hopefully we'll have it soon. Somebody else was asking about forms. So we added forms back in January. We are making updates to forms. So you can create a form in Grist. You can publish it right from Grist. And then this is the published form. Somebody can then start filling something in, whatever that is, and then submit it. And then once it's submitted, it goes to like the underlying table. So here's all possible responses. So here's the one that I just made. And what's nice about this is it will automatically update all the dashboards you have. So I have this overall dashboard. You can see that there's now one response in March of 2024. That's the one I just made. So if I like drill in by month, there it is. So so your dashboards stay the same, and it's just being populated with the data that's coming in from the form. So one of the questions about the form was, can you set access rules like on the form itself? Only in the sense that you can determine who can and can't edit the form in general, all forms, not by form, just in general forms, and who can and can't publish it. Right now, only owners can publish it. It's tied to, so yeah, so that's, forms don't have the same level of granular access as like our table data does. And then the follow-up question was, can you then limit like the responses, who can see what at this level? And the answer there is yes. You can then use access rules to do things like, so here's an example where this is like a nonprofit that is helping people in different cities throughout France. And then let's say we have team members. So let's say that Carla should only see records related to Bordeaux, right? So here's all of our intake. If I view this as Carla, so now I'm pretending I'm Carla, she only sees Bordeaux, right? So this kind of granular access where then everything is still updating in real time. You are still collaborating, but rows are being filtered. Columns might be hidden. Entire tables might be hidden. That depends on your access rules. And we are going to set up some access rules in today's webinar. I see someone's having issues that they can't hear anything, but it might be on your end because it seems like everyone else might be okay. So hopefully that gets resolved. And there was another question about sums. So sums are a little tricky if you're coming from spreadsheets, not tricky, but just different. Because in a spreadsheet, you're used to sort of having the column and then having a sum down here. You can see as I highlighted, there is a little sum happening down here. You can copy and paste. But really, sums are handled in what we call summary tables. So if I come to this dashboard, this table of donations, all of these donations that are across different years, are being summarized here by year. And then when I click on a year, I can also drill into, okay, for a given year, which categories did I make donations in, right? So this kind of so you can use summary tables to either summarize an entire table or groups within that table. So I'll just show you really quickly how to create something like this, but then I'll point you to resources that are better. So let's say I wanted to just create these two widgets. So just if you're new to Grist, a little bit of language. Anytime you're building a solution in Grist, we call this a document. It has multiple tables, multiple views. On the left, we call these pages. Think of each page as like a dashboard. And then you can either add things to a new page, or you can add more like windows or views, widgets to the page that you have open. So I'm going to add a whole new page. And what I want to do is I want to take my donation data and summarize it. This little icon here is for summarizing. And if I just summarize this without grouping, it summarizes the whole table. Or I can summarize by year. So what that did was it took all of my donations, and now here, this is summarizing by year. And as I add things for, say, 2025, it'll just create that new row. I don't need to recreate the summary table. Sometimes in Excel, you have to like recreate a pivot table. This is a pivot table. It'll just update based on the underlying data. And then if I create another summary table that shares a group by column, so what I mean by that is, let's say I'm going to add here donations summarized by year again. So this is the same as the existing widget. And by category, because it's sharing, I can have it link. So I'm not going to go too deep into this because we're only in the question phase, but basically now it's showing me, okay, within 2020, what were the categories? So all of this kind of like summary tables, all of this is in a guide with videos that we have and sample data where you're going to recreate a template that uses this feature very heavily. I'm going to link to this. So I just shared that in the webinar platform. So that's summaries. And then there was another question, which was about using Grist to create dashboards for inputting data. We're going to be doing that on today's call. And then there was another question about using Grist to improve your accounting workflow. Grist is used for accounting, but there's so many different ways of what that could mean. So at this point, I'm just going to point you to community resources where you can reach out and ask for help to figure out how to set up your workflow. So there's our community forum. The community forum, you can ask questions. It looks like this. There's like an ask for help section, and you can see, you know, people ask. You can also search to see if somebody has already asked your question before, how something was set up. And then we also have a Discord server where people share all kinds of cool things. So for the Discord server, let me share that link to join as well. And the Discord server is maybe sometimes a little bit more fun. It does require Discord, but, you know, people show off things sometimes just a little more casually in there. Okay. So let's jump into the main part of the webinar. So let's pretend we work for an NGO called Ocean Cool. We're doing cool ocean projects. I'm not sure what they are. Basically, Ocean Cool, they have a grant application team that's already using Grist. And then they have another team that's not using Grist, and we're going to help that team out. But I just wanted to kind of give you an idea of if you've never seen Grist before, if you're new to it, of like what a dashboard could look like. So the grant application team, they track applications. They can see at a glance what they're applying for, the status, more information about how much are they applying for, when it was created, by who, what's the foundation funding it, who are the contacts at that foundation, and next steps, right? So this everything updates when I click through, right? Information about this application, who's funding it, who's working on it. And there's different ways to look at this data over and over. So we can see here, we have these tasks that are assigned to a particular employee. Well, what if I just wanted to click on an employee and see their tasks? So then we have something like this, like who is Otto? What are Otto's tasks? What applications is he pushing through, right? So at a different part of the company, once a grant has been approved, there is a project implementation team. There's project leaders who are then taking that money and they're giving it to partners on the ground. And then the finance team has to approve that budget. So they need to send a budget to finance every year for the next year. And then finance needs to consolidate those budgets and figure out how funds will be dispersed the next year based on a particular beat, right? So they do it in Excel right now, and they get all kinds of sheets. So they might get something like this from a project leader. That's just who's the recipient, how much money are they getting, when, what frequency, and then what's the total budget for the year for that particular project, right? And then somebody else got creative and they're doing theirs this way. And they're just by each month. So instead of saying like this amount on this frequency, you have to go through and figure out, okay, is this one monthly or quarterly? And then there's a person in finance who basically is reconciling all of these sheets, and then every month figuring out how things got dispersed and whether or not things are as promised. And it's a bit painful. It requires different teams, but the finance department thinks they have to do it this way because they don't want everyone seeing the budgets for all projects or the grants for all projects. People should only see budgets that are fund disbursement and budgets that are pertinent to their projects, right? Well, the grant application team told them, let's build something in Grist. So we're going to build a solution for budgeting and tracking fund disbursements. We're going to do it on this call together, but I want to show you the end product first, what we're building towards, because it might help you understand what Grist is capable of and why we're building things in a particular way. So this is where we're going. So we started with the Excel spreadsheets, and what we want is just one place where finance can see every single budget line item, who's getting it, how much, on what beat, what are the annual totals for what project being funded by which grant, because every grant needed to report back, how was this used? Or maybe you want to slice and dice this a different way. Maybe you want to look at a particular project and see what amount has been budgeted for that project. Or within a grant, how much was granted, how much has been budgeted, the amount dispersed. Someone's asking, is it possible to keep your data in Google Sheets and access them through Grist? You can set this up if you want a live sync. We'll answer this later. Basically, there's ways to do it. But anything with like live syncing, big changes in the Google Sheet can break down the way that those things are being connected. Really what you want to do, if you can, is just set up workflows where people are just working in this directly, where your project manager is just coming in, picking the project, adding a recipient, and just filling things in here. That's really, you want to create these workflows while still protecting data. Yeah, okay. So maybe you also want to look at recipients, who is receiving money, contact information about them, what is the budget, and how have funds been dispersed. So throughout the year, money is being dispersed according to a particular frequency. And then just in general, all funds that have been dispersed, just like a table. And then this staff table is important for setting rules, for saying, okay, Sandy is in charge of nesting. So when Sandy comes to any of these dashboards, if I'm viewing this as Sandy, she should only be seeing the nesting budget line items. She's only looking at the nesting project, right? So we're going to set up these access rules as well. And then the finance department can see everything. Okay. So we're going to start the way most people start, which is with a completely new document. So this is your team site. If you haven't seen one of these, when you sign up for Grist, you have your personal documents at docs.getgrist.com. You can create a team site. And then a team site has like a subdomain. So this is Ocean Cools, where they're keeping their team documents together. And then we're just going to click Add New and create an empty document. So this is where a lot of things start, just a blank Grist document. I always recommend, before even starting, think through what are your requirements, what are your workflows, because it'll help get you started with a better structure. You can always change things later. You can always customize things later. But once something is live, it always gets scary to touch it. You can. There are ways to do that without affecting anyone else's work, but it's better to just try and think through, what are the tables that I need? How am I working with this data? And I do that right in Grist. So we're going to use this table to basically define our requirements. So I did that very quickly. You can rename tables by just clicking on the name here. Almost everything can be clicked. Like I can rename this document right here. So maybe 2024 budget. I've just renamed the document. Same thing with headers. So in Excel, your first row is usually your headers. In Grist, you're using an Excel-like or a spreadsheet-like interface to create a database. That's why we don't just have a long grid of empty rows, because that's not useful. Every row should be a kind of record. So in a budget table, every row is a budget line item. In a staff table, every row is a different employee. So here, every row should be a requirement, and your column headers, you just click right in the header to rename it. So I want to list my requirements. So what is a requirement? I'm just going to have some open questions here that we can discuss, and then whether or not it has been done. I'll just copy and paste so I don't have to type things out slowly. I'll just copy and paste what I already figured out, and then we'll walk through it together. Okay. And you can copy and paste things from other spreadsheets and things like that. I was just copying this from like a table in a document, like a text document. So formatting things in Grist in a traditional spreadsheet, like with Google Sheets or Excel, usually the toolbars on the top. We have it over on the right here in something called the Creator panel. It's called that because it's very typical where you have one person who is setting everything up for someone else. And then you can either configure things for the whole table. So for example, for the whole table, maybe I want zebra stripes. Maybe I don't want horizontal lines or even vertical lines, things like that. Or you can configure things at the column level. So maybe here I see that this is a text column. There's different column types, which we're going to explore on this webinar. I want line wrapping. This is the line wrapping icon. I can resize these things by clicking and dragging. For questions, I'm going to text wrap this as well. And then for this column, because there's no data, it hasn't made a guess. Grist tries to guess. So as soon as I enter text, it's like, okay, this is probably a text column. If I enter numbers, it's going to say, okay, this is probably a numeric column. You can always change the column type. Like for example, zip codes, you actually want it to be text instead of numbers because of that. Sometimes they start with 0, right? So you can always change it depending on what it actually is. But here we want a toggle column, which is just a yes or no. So as we do things, we're just going to say, okay, this was done. Okay. So what are our requirements? We want a place to track budgets. We want to know for each budget line item, who's receiving the money, how much, on what tempo, what frequency, what project is it for, what grant is funding this, and then what's the total for the year. We want grant level information. We want to click on a grant and see how much has been approved, budgeted, and dispersed. We want project level information, which is for each project, the same thing, what has been approved, what has been dispersed, recipient level information, contact info, budgeted and dispersed as well. We want these things side by side, a different way to slice and dice the same data. And then we have some access rules requirements. Staff should only see information related to their projects, but finance can't see everything. And when it comes to fund disbursements in particular, staff can see things related to their projects, but they can't edit it. Only finance can edit fund disbursements. So we're going to do that with access rules. So a quick thing about like tables, it's a lot. Something I've seen people do when they're new to Grist and they're coming from a spreadsheet is they might say, okay, do I need a budget table per project or a budget table per grant or a budget table per, you know, some other category? And what I'd say, it's as much as possible, if your objects, like your record type, is similar across different tables, it should really be one table because that's going to help you with analysis, with relational data, like relating different tables. And what you do then is segment it with a column. So you're going to segment it. So if we come back to the, we'll go back to the example that was completed. So if I go back to the completed one, I'm just segmenting it in a column. These are all the nesting ones. This is by project, by grant. So we're going to do that kind of segmenting with a column. Okay. Any questions about this? All right, so let's start by creating our data tables. We know we need to track budgets, grants, projects, recipients. Let's start by importing data. So remember we had, this one was pretty clean. This one pretty close. What's missing is we don't have the project and the grant, but Jill in finance, she knows who this is. She knows who sent this to her. She can fill it in. So we'll start there because we're going to get most of our headers. So let's import from file. Let's import that file. It's going to a new table. You can see that Grist already took the first row in Excel, added it to the headers, and then everything else is just filling in. And this stray, this is a preview. We haven't imported yet. It's a preview what we're going to import to a new table. And this stray number is just that summary from Excel. We'll just delete it once we bring it in. So we don't need this summary. We're going to handle that differently in Grist. And now what we want to do is first rename your table. So click in here, rename it. This is budget. And let's make sure, let's get the right column widths and make sure that we have the right column types. So Grist is going to make a guess when you import. It sees text here. It's like, this is text. That's correct. Here, it guessed numeric. It's also money. So let's format it with a $sign. For frequency, it saw text, so it guessed text. But here we only really have 3 options and we want it to be spelled the same way every time. we want like a drop-down list. So that's really a choice. Grist is taking what it sees here and already kind of populating what those choices could be. So that means that when I add a new row, so this sort of grayed out row is how you add a new one, it's going to let me pick from that list. And then you can click in here, and if I add a new one and save that, now there's a new one here. So that's how this is where you edit the list that is available from the drop down. And if you are somebody who has permission to add things, you can add it also just kind of from here, and you can see it got reflected on this side. So I'm going to go ahead and delete that because it's not actually a budget. And you can also click on this T here to add color, just to draw your eye to certain things. So I'm just going to quickly add some color just by clicking on that T and saving. And then you can also see it in the drop down. Oh, I added a row by accident. And then for your annual total, this should be a formula. We want a formula that's going to tell us, based on the amount and the frequency, how much is it for the year. We'll get back to this. We'll do this later. It'll be fun. But let's just leave this as is. Okay. We also know that we want, that we need a table of, oh, that's right. We wanted to add in projects and grants. So we need to we know we're going to add more than just this data. So we need to start segmenting. So the project and the grant. So the project, just because Jill knows, she knows everything. Nothing runs in this company without her. I put it in the top. I can, if I want, can just copy paste. That'll fill in. There's also another keyboard shortcut, which is kind of fun, which is like if you select a range, Control D fills it in with the value at the top of that range. Okay, so we know the project and the grant. We need a table. We know where we want to go with this. We want to relate every recipient, every row's recipient to a table of recipients, every project to a project table, grant to a grant table. So let's start building those tables as well. So let's add, I'm going to add an empty table. We're just adding a new table. I'll start with projects. So for projects, let me see if I already have this. Yeah, I think it's just two. We're just going to go with project name. So no, one of them is nesting, and the other one I think is listening to the sea. Okay, so that's just a project name. We don't need these for now. We'll come back to this. We'll add things as we grow our use case. Hi, Eduardo. Good seeing you. Then we're going to add another table. This one's going to be grants. So for grants, we want the grant that was approved, like the grant name, the project that it is funding, and the amount granted. And for this, I'm just going to copy paste what I already have just to move a little faster. And I love how you can just copy paste. I know it's a small thing, but not all of these database tools can do that. Oh, hello. Hi, Vivian. Okay, and then recipients table. I'm just going to import this because I already have it from somewhere else. So I'm just going to bring in all of my recipients. I'm just going to import it. Here's a preview. It's a whole new table. I want to rename it recipients and make sure that the columns are, you know, the types that I want. So I think it's just text across the board. That's good. Okay, so here's our basic tables. We still need to do funds dispersed. We're actually going to add that later. Let's start with just the budget use case so we can show how it is easy to add things to a solution that's already working. So we also want to add more data here. So we could do data cleaning in Grist. We're just going to make this webinar way too big. We have a data cleaning in Grist webinar you can find on YouTube. We have a webinar playlist. But Jill, she was emailing with the person who put this together. His name is Wade. And Wade, she was like, Wade, this is missing a lot of information. I need some help. And together, oh, whoops, I don't want to hide. I want to unhide. Together, they put this together, which basically is just letting Jill know, okay, what is the actual frequency per recipient? Basically what Sandy had done. We're just going to import this sheet. So how are we going to do that in Grist? So let's import from file. Oh, so the key thing we're doing here, just to explain what I'm doing, it's I want to import to this existing table, not to a new table. Import from file. Let's take that Excel document. Remember, I had two sheets. It had the one with all the colors and the notes. We're not importing that. We're just going to skip it. Skipping that table on import. And then there's the second sheet. And on this one, we want to go to budget. We want to make sure that our columns are being mapped correctly. There was no project or grant column in the Excel. That's why this isn't here. If you had something like, say, customer data, where you have a unique ID for each customer and you want to update values that have changed, you can do something like update existing records instead of duplicating and then match on something. That's not the case here, but there is a way to like merge and update when you're importing data to an existing table. So for project, we know Wade only works on one project, listening to the C. So you can actually apply formulas to do some transformations while you're importing things into Grist. So instead of mapping a column, I can say apply formula. And in this case, I just want to add text. So text, also called a string, you do it between quotes. This is a Python-y thing. We'll get to this when we talk to formulas, but it's just listening to the C. And then when I hit enter, you can see in the preview that it's going to fill in that data. And we'll leave grant unmapped for now. It doesn't affect anything, and we'll just fill it in quickly. So I'm going to go ahead and import this to the budget table. So now it's here. This was the total that was coming from Excel, like that extra summary line, which we don't need. This we're going to handle with a formula. Here's the project. And then the grant, there was like a note in Excel that was saying which is funded by which, right? So I think it was, this is why you want to move away from this workflow, because everything is confusing and not in one place. Okay, so squawk is for audio whales. So basically, I'm just going to fill it in manually now, but in the future, it's just going to be reference columns. We're just going to be choosing from reference columns. I'm just doing it this way for the setup. For, you know, we're migrating. And then everything else is the narwhals. Okay, so now we have our sample data. This is going to grow over time. There's going to be hundreds or thousands of these rows, different projects. We're just starting with our proof of concept. We have our main tables. We have some sample data. We're going to start referencing things between these tables, but I want to pause to see if there's any questions about importing or creating tables. Okay, so let's get relational. So we know that each one of these rows should be related to a recipient, a project, or a grant. When data is already in here, Grist can feel a bit magical. So what I want to do is change the type. I want to come over here to column type and say that it's actually a reference. So a reference is one-to-one. It's saying one budget line item is going to relate to one recipient. Let's say that each budget line item could be funding more than one recipient, which is not the case here. But if it was, then it would be a reference list. Like this is going to 2 recipients. But in this case, it's a one-to-one. Because of the data, Grist is already seeing this data. It's seeing a match in the recipients table. So it's making a guess as to how I want to create this reference. So it's saying, okay, what data are you referencing? I'm referencing the recipients data, and I'm showing the organization. And what this does is now when I enter a new budget line item, here's the list of recipients. So it's giving me like a particular list to work with. And then it starts autofilling as you type as well. And you can add a new one if you have that permission. And if I add a new one here, what is happening to the recipients table? At the recipients table, here's that new one, right? Because it's only what's being populated here is this list. That's that relationship. This person does not exist. And what happens then if we go back? It's just gone because it doesn't exist. So there is no relation. Did not make that link, right? So that's what that link is for. Let's do the same thing for projects. We're going to create a reference. We actually want to link to the projects table, project name, apply, and then grants. We're doing the same thing. It must not be a perfect match, easy enough to fix. So basically it's case sensitive, space sensitive. So let's just apply it anyway. And I'm just going to then just, all right. Oh, I see. I put in the wrong thing. So I wanted for this one, the nesting one, and then just fill that in. That's what it is. So that's the grant for nesting. And then, oh, I just did Control D, that shortcut that I shared. So that also works with reference columns. So once you make a reference, if it was just like a misspell when you were importing data, you can just whoop, fill it in. Okay. Let's see if there's anything else that should be relational in any of the other pages. So projects, what we can see here is that a project might be funded by more than one grant. So this is how I want to show reference lists. So let's say I want to add a new one here, which is funded by. And what I'm saying here is a reference list. There could be more than one grant. I want to see the grant name funding this. So this one is being funded by one grant, and this one's being funded by two. And I can widen this, and I can do some line wrapping. So then this is saying it's referencing two different grants that are funding this project. And if you click this little icon, it actually opens it in a light box so you can get more information and you can edit it if you want to as well. In grants, here we have some projects. This is linking to projects. It's a one-to-one in this case. Could be different in your projects. And then with recipients, I don't think there's anything here. Okay. So now everything is relational. So what was the point of that? We saw what it does for filling in data, but it also lets you link tables visually and dynamically on the same page. So let's say what I want is to be able to click on a project and see all of the budget line items, all of these line items that are related to that project. So I'm going to add a new widget, a new view to this page that I already have open. So what do I want to see? I want to see budget. You can see that this select by appeared. And that's because Grist knows there's a relationship between the budget table and the projects table that's already in this page, right? It already knows each budget line item is referencing a project. So because of that, I can just connect them. On the top left of every widget, you can grab, drag, and drop. So now we can see how these things are updating when I click on a particular project name. And again, it knows how to do this because of this column. This column is saying this is related to the project, like this project, nesting to nesting. And you might be starting to get confused. Like, okay, so we have budget here and we have budget here. Are these two different tables? They're not two different tables. They're two different views of the same underlying table. So what I mean by that is if I come in here and I add a new, I'm just going to add a new budget line item in here. Just say it's funded by something. So this one that's 500 quarterly for Oahu. If I come back to budget, it's here. It's the same table. And the way you want to see what your actual tables are, it's under tools. There's something called raw data. This is telling me my actual tables. So if I open budget, I can see everything's here, including that Oahu one for 500. If I change this data anywhere, you'll see it updated in every view. So we're just looking at data from different dashboards to make it easier to work with that data, but it is still a single source of truth, a single table. That's why it was so important in the beginning when we were laying out our requirements to know what are our actual tables so that you don't create a bunch of different budget tables that then you make a change here, it isn't reflected over there, and these things fall out of sync. You want to try to avoid that. Okay. So we added budget here. Let's do the same thing. We want to see what the budget is to spend any particular grant. So again, we want to add to this page budget linked by the grant. I'm going to just drag it underneath. And same thing with recipients for each particular recipient. And again, this is possible because remember, each line item is related to a recipient. So when we're looking at recipients, we can say, okay, let's add more data to this page. We want to do the budget linked by recipients. And I'm going to again bring it underneath. And then there's like a little drag and drop. There's like a dotted line that appears. So that's getting relational. Any questions about referencing data and linking widgets on a page? Across a reference. There's actually many, many ways to link widgets, but this is the most commonly used one. In fact, you might have seen some of them when I was picking from the drop-down. This is the main way you want to do it. Okay. I don't see anyone typing, so I'm going to assume there's no questions. Okay, let's do formulas. Okay, so we said we were going to do this annual total. So about formulas and Grist. How is it similar to a traditional spreadsheet? How is it different? The similarity is Grist does support a lot of common spreadsheet functions. If you click this Help Center button here, I'll just make this a little wider. If you click on Help Center, one of the quick links is to our function reference. It explains things about formulas in Grist generally, which is what I'm about to explain. But you can see everything that's in all caps is a spreadsheet function. And some of these might start to look familiar, like VLOOKUP. Which I've never used it in Grist because reference lookups are so much better. We'll get there. but it's there if you want to use it. Sum, and things like average. And when you click on one of these, it does give you an example. Like, what does this do? What is the syntax? How do you use it? So if you wrote this, what would you expect to see? There's a bit of guidance there about spreadsheet functions. But Grist also, so that's the way that it's similar to a traditional spreadsheet. Now, the difference is, which sometimes are a bit of a gotcha for people who aren't used to a more database type product, it's the formula applies to the entire column. Everything is always over the entire column because we're structuring data, which is why we don't have sums at the bottom. Because if I did have a sum here, then this row isn't a budget line item. It's a sum now. It's a different type of thing. So formulas apply to the whole column. And also Grist supports Python formulas, which are very powerful and let you do a lot of cool things. And the good news about Python is that because it is such a popular programming language, there's tons of it out there. So you can use AI to write your Python formulas for you. If you don't want to learn Python, you don't have to. So I'm going to click =sign to just convert this into a formula. And I'm going to use the AI assistant. And let's hope it works on the first try. You never know. It's pretty good, though. Okay. So this AI formula assistant, some tips for working with it. Number one, you do want as much as possible to have your tables and your columns named, because what we send along with your question, it's your metadata, like your schema. So how things are named goes with your question, so that then the AI can better understand, well, what is this? It's going to read this and say, oh, it's a budget. Okay, this is amount. It's not actually reading your values inside these cells. The one exception being choice columns. It is reading like that. It's considered like it knows that this is a choice and these are potential choices. So it understands a little bit more what this is about. But it's not reading like the name of recipients, for example. So the more you name things, and also column type is important. It knows that this column is numeric. So it's another hint to the AI that I'm expecting a number. If this was a toggle column, which is just true or false, then it's going to, the question also will tell it what I expect, but knowing the type helps it format things correctly. And speaking of formatting, while you can do some formatting in Python, I would try to do as much formatting as possible in the creator panel. So like, don't ask it to insert the $, because then it's going to turn this into a different, it won't be numeric anymore. It's going to be text now because it needs to take that $. Just add the $sign this way. So try to format over here, unless it's something like, make this all caps or something like that. Okay, so let's see what it does. So yeah, just doing it live. Let's say, so okay, I always say please. Let's be polite to the bot. Please calculate the annual budget total based on amount and frequency. Let's see how it does. So you'll notice that I'm not necessarily pointing to exactly what a column is or explaining it. It's pretty short. Use plain language. You can be conversational. And if you don't get what you want on your first result, you can ask for edits. I can apply and preview and see if I'm getting what I expect. So I would expect 8 times 4, because this is quarterly, looking pretty good. Monthly is times 12. Yearly should only be once. This one's times 12 again, looking pretty good. We can click save and just add the $sign. And if it didn't give me what I want, just, keep talking to it. Just keep talking until you get what you want or start over. Okay. So there we go. There's one simple Python formula, and you didn't even have to know how to do this. Though, if you want to learn Python, this is a great way to learn it. Go reverse engineer it, make some tweaks, see what happens. Okay. The other thing that's very powerful in Grist is when you do have these relationships between tables, like if I were to highlight this column, I can see the total here is 24,000 has been budgeted for this project, but maybe I just want it up here. You would do this using a sum also based on a lookup. We have a shortcut for this, which is, I think it came out like last fall. A lot of people miss it. It is a little confusing to understand if you don't understand lookups, but what I'm saying is in this shortcut, I want you to look up in the budget, everything pointing to this project. So this is saying the relationship is project. This is the way that it's pointing. Give me the annual total sum and then a $sign. So what this is doing is it's basically taking this 20. It's just doing this sum that I can kind of highlight right down here. That's that shortcut. This is a shortcut. I do recommend if you want to get really good at Grist, understand this formula. It looks confusing. There's a lot of documentation we have around this because it's so powerful, because you need to understand two things deeply. You need to understand references. And when you understand references in Grist deeply, you become a super user. And also just lookup record syntax is so good. You start using this in tons of stuff. It's very powerful. We do have an article that's all about references and lookups in formulas. It's just about this. So I'm going to go ahead and share that resource. Yeah, a lot of people miss that. It's wonderful. And then we can just, you know, we're going to just rename this to amount budgeted. It makes life a lot easier. But really understanding how that works is wonderful. Okay, so any other formula things I want to do? A way to reference previous rows in the same table as formulas. If we have time at the end of this, I'll show you a proof of concept for that. It's actually not super easy and something we should implement. There's many ways people have worked around it, but it's not like a native thing that Grist does. Okay, in grants, let's do the same thing. Oh, I didn't move this down. We're going to do the same thing. So let's remember what we're trying to do here. We want budget line items referencing this particular grant. I want the annual total and I want the sum. I could do the average. I could do min. I could do max. I'm going to do sum. Get a little $, amount budgeted. Okay. So is there anything else I want to do here? I think just reinforce what I was saying. If I make a change here, if I make this 2000, I would expect that one to jump up by 1, right? So these things are always live. They're always syncing. And even if I were to add, so let's say I add, I'm going to go to projects. I'm funding this project. And I'm going to add another recipient here. I'm going to do this one quarterly. This updated, right? So this is Sandlot Wiz's 600 quarterly being funded by this grant. So we can, the two things I wanted to show is one in budget. Everything is just being updated. I didn't need to, like in Excel, you need to update the like formula or range, right? It just does it automatically. It's applied to the whole formula. It's everywhere in every view where you want to see it. Here it is again. And it's just being included up here. So that's a really important thing about how these tables are working together. We're creating views, but the underlying data is the same and formulas just update. Okay. Anything else about formulas? Okay, let's move on to adding fund disbursement. So the other thing we wanted to do was say, okay, we have this much budgeted, this much was granted, this much was budgeted. How much have we actually dispersed? And we're going to do this in a whole new table. This wasn't even really being tracked in a good way before. So we're adding a whole new workflow. So let's add an empty table. Fund disbursement, I guess. We can call it whatever we want. Okay. We have a whole new table here. And what we want is we want to know the date that the fund was dispersed, the recipient, who is it going to, then the project that is being funded by this, the grant that is funding it. There's a keyboard shortcut I never use for adding columns, but I think it's Alt =. And then amount. How much are we actually giving them? So let's go through and format it really quickly. So this is a date. It should be a date. You can change the formatting of it. So maybe I want to do like the more like Americanized month, day, year kind of thing. Do I want 3? Yeah, I'm going to do this one. I mean, 4-digit year. Recipients. Let's go reference. I want to reference recipients and show the recipient name, the organization name. Project is also a reference. This is tied to a particular project. So I'm just kind of going through and adding this to then show you like a more manual data entry, not importing from a file. So that's why I'm doing it this way. Just like what are different ways to enter data into Grist. So here we have grant, and I'm showing the grant. And then this would be numeric with a $. So I can say, okay, on the 31st, finance sent out to the Atlantic puffin protectors for the nesting project, funded by this nesting grant. Let me just make a bit more room on everything. And they sent out like 600. And they're going to do the same thing. I'm just going to kind of, but just on a different date. I can use this calendar like I did. I think, let me see if this works. I haven't done it in a while. I think if I just like do Feb 8, like even in a different format, it's pretty good at getting where you want to go and then just converting it for you, which is cool. So however you think is fine. You don't have to like be very strict about the format that this is in. Okay, so let's add a few more. I'm just going to copy and paste it for the sake of speed. Copying and pasting from somewhere else just to move faster. I don't want to double click. So I'm just adding a bunch of these, and you can see I pasted text and it still matched that text and created that reference correctly. So now I can do things like on the grant page, I want to, same thing we did with budget. I want to add more data to this view. I want to see the funds that were dispersed based on the grant. And then here it is. So I can, so it looks like no funds were dispersed for this one, right? But, and maybe I want to know at the top level here, I want to do that lookup again, where I want to say, okay, now I want fund disbursement based on the grant, the amount, give me that sum. So you can do these lookups very quickly. It's still, this might just be the nerd in me recommending. If you understand that, it's very useful. Okay, so here's the amount dispersed. We added grants. On the recipient page, we might want to do the same thing. We might want to just see what has actually been dispersed based on the recipient. Because what this lets us do is say, okay, we told Atlantic Puffins they're going to get 600 a month. All right, later this month, we're going to send out the next one, I guess in a few days or something like that. And then see whether or not things have been dispersed. Yeah, okay. So that's that part of it. I think we're ready for access rules, unless there's any questions about this. Okay, access rules. It's both my favorite part of this and where I'm definitely going to make mistakes because I always move too quickly. Okay, so you set access rules on the access rules page. Let me explain what we're looking at here. So the default rules are saying, so this user.access, what this means is if I were to add somebody to this document, like let's say I was adding support, am I adding them as a viewer, an owner, or an editor, right? So what is their access level when I add somebody to this document? So if they're an editor and owner, they have permission to read data. They have permission to update data, make changes to what's already there, create data, add a new row. So it's possible to say you can't update existing things, but you can add a new one. Or delete rows, delete data. And a viewer is set to read only. There's also this special rule, which is really, really important. By default, it's on. This is a bit of like a legacy thing in Grist. This is why it's red, to draw people's attention to it. What this is saying is that editors can edit structure, which means that they can create new tables, delete columns, create new layouts, and even write formulas. Sometimes you want to prevent editors from doing this for two reasons. One, it's if we're adding people to this and they try to enter this number manually, they're going to erase the entire formula. Just prevent them from being able to edit formula fields so that they don't get rid of formulas that are doing important work. The other thing is, if they are good at formulas, even things that are hidden from them, you can use a formula to find it. So if data is very sensitive, don't let people mess with formulas. It's too powerful. So it kind of depends on your team. Okay. The next thing we want to do, we want to say, let's go back to the finished product, right? Which is based on who somebody is, based on how they logged in, what are the rules that apply to what they can and cannot do with Grist. So this staff table is very powerful because what this is saying is when Sandy logs in, she's logging in with this email. I want Grist to look up in this table, match this, and then know, oh, she's in the nesting project and she's not in finance. That's what it's telling Grist, right? But we need to point Grist to where this information lives. So let's do that in the thing that we're building. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to import that same staff table. I already have it ready to go. Okay, it's a whole new table. Let's just call it staff. And let's make sure we have the correct column types. So I want to say this is text. That's correct. Text. This one should be a reference. We are referencing a project. And Jill, she doesn't work on any project. She's in the finance department. It's okay if it's blank. She's just not related to a project. That's not a big deal. And then she works in finance, and Sandy and Wade do not. So now that we have this table, we need to do something called add user attributes. And what this means it's trying to think of so you can name it whatever you want. This name is arbitrary. It's what am I going to call this in my rules? I'm going to call this team. And what am I looking up? Remember I explained access means, okay, if somebody comes to this document, are they an owner, an editor, or a viewer? There's other things that Grist knows about you and knows your name as you set it in your profile. There's other things like user ID, session ID. These are useful in other contexts. Most of the time you want email. You don't want to use name because people can change their names in their profile. Email, it's a little bit, it stays consistent, right? So we're going to look up their email in, just going back to the finished product to make this clearer, in the staff table. So what table am I doing this matching? And then what column is storing their email? This is the column that's storing the email. That's why we're saying, okay, these are all the columns in the staff table. I'm saying it's email. So let's save that. So what now that we've created this, we're telling Grist, okay, when somebody logs in, their email matches this. We're going to start, we know some things about them. We know their projects. We know whether or not they work in finance. Okay. Is that clear? I feel like that always requires a little bit of thinking. Okay. There's also, awesome, great. There's also a few things that happen. We're going to start adding table. Let me just show you. We're going to start adding table rules, right? It's completely blank, but there's something we know is always true. Two things are always true. Whoever is an owner, an administrator of this should just have access to everything. And whoever is in finance, they should just have access to everything. So I'm actually going to reset that. And what I want to do is there's these default rules, which is like a way to like seed rules that are repetitive. So when adding table rules, automatically grant owner full access. It just writes this rule for you. And there's something else I want to do here. Or this is true. Either they're already an owner, or see, it's telling me there's an error because I haven't finished the rule. It's very reactive, but I'm going to finish the rule. Or if the user in the attribute that I just created, which is team, now that it's made that match in the finance column, meaning this column, in the finance column, if that is true, so this is Python, you need a double equal sign to evaluate. So it's a double equal sign to be like equals, not a single equal sign means something else. It's defining a variable. Here we're comparing. So if it's true, if it's checked, then they'll have access to everything. So what that lets me do, it's now when I add a budget, that rule is already there. I don't have to keep writing it over and over and over and over. Okay, so on the budget, now we want to restrict things based on your projects. So I'm going to keep going back and forth to help you understand what's happening in the data, how we're writing the rule. So we want to say, based on the value in the projects column, if it matches that staff member's project, then we can show it to them basically. So I'm just going to add a little rule here saying it's a $sign to start writing, to call a column. It starts auto-completing. So in the budget table, there's a column called project. If that is in, the reason I'm using in is because it's a list. This is all documented in our, like we have a bunch of access rule videos, but basically a staff member could work for more than one. So this is a reference list. They could work for more than one. So when it's a list, you say in. So if it's in user.team.projects, if that's the case, then allow everything. Otherwise, we're going to deny. I just use these quick shortcuts. I could also just click and re-click. You can do these individually, or there's like a allow all, deny all, read only, and clear. So what I'm saying is if the project is a project that that person is in charge of, then they should be granted everything. So let's just look at this at budget. We haven't done it for every table yet, but let's just look at it at budget. Let's see if this is working as I expected, or if I once again move too quickly. Sandy. Oh, I moved too quickly. This is very typical of me. So this is always where I'm going way too fast. Things are very case sensitive. So let's see. This is project. That's correct. And this is good for troubleshooting. I actually like when this happens because this happens to me all the time. Okay. User team is in projects. I can also just make it an equal sign. Make my life easier. But that would be explaining a bit too much. Let me actually just do it like this. team.projects. Let me see. Oh, I know what I did. No, I didn't. User. And if somebody in here already knows, I know a lot of you already know how to do this, and you already caught what I did too quickly, please let me know. It should just be like that. If somebody caught it, please let me know, because I'm moving quickly. If not, I'll just... Yeah, that's not protected, so that makes sense. I was just making sure it wasn't seeing her as not an owner. So, I'm moving very quickly. I was doing a quick check just to be like, does it think she doesn't have access? Is that's what's going on? Email, this is correct. Let me double check that this is the right name. So what I'm double checking is that nothing got introduced with like a 2. If I had already worked on this earlier in the day when I was running through this, something like that could happen. Oh, this is why. Let me go back to what I was saying. I got confused between remember how I was jumping back and forth? I was jumping back and forth. That's what I was doing. No, it's not because they're not financed. That's not what happened. What happened is I confused myself jumping between 2 different documents. Now it's working. Let me explain why. So this is what I was saying about lists versus one-to-one. When it's one-to-one, you want to say equals. This must be this. If it's a list, so when it's a reference list, I'm saying, is this project a part of this list? And I was looking here where it's a reference list, and I wasn't realizing that here I had it set as a one-to-one instead of a one-to-many. It's the difference between one-to-one or one-to-many. Anyway, this is in our access rules documentation. That's all it was just I confused myself bouncing between documents. But yeah, so Sandy now should only be able to see nesting. And then Wade will only see listening to the C. And once it works for one, you're pretty confident it works for everyone else. You might want to double check anyway. But really, it was just I hadn't set it as a one-to-many in this document. Okay, so that works. Let's do this as well. For projects, this is going back to what is a reference. So I can't just say, is this project in this list like I just did for budget? And the reason I can't do that is because this is text. This is actually just this text. And this is a list of records. So a reference column is actually referencing an entire row. Let me show you. What I mean by that is, even though this is showing me text, the actual value being stored is the entire row. All of this that is in here is being stored as like a whole record. So what it's actually storing, if I just show you, is an ID. It's saying it's recipient 1, recipient 2, recipient 3. And you can see when people repeat, recipient 7 in rows 6 and 8 here is the Coco Cruna Collective. So it's actually tying something to an ID. So just to make this a little bit easier, now that I'm just going to say, who is the staff member in charge of this particular project? So I'm just going to make a reference to staff. Show me their name. So Sandy is nesting, Wade is the other one. And the reason I just explained this ID is because what I'm actually going to do with the rule here for projects, I'm going to say when the staff matches the ID of a staff. So what I mean by that, it's how do you find their ID? I'm just going to do, this is like a little $ ID. It looks like it's the same as row, but it's not. If I click and drag this, you can see it actually, now the 3 is between 1 and 2. It is fixed, the actual ID of this record. So what we're saying is in projects, if I show row ID, staff 2 should be Sandy. There's Sandy. And then Wade is number 3. We're actually matching the ID. That's what's actually being stored. So when I'm writing the access rule for the project, so this is like a little bit of this is why I'm saying definitely do references and lookups. All of this is explained there, and it makes your life, it makes Grist, it unlocks the relational part of Grist for you. So what I'm saying, it's in the projects table. If staff equals user.team.id, ignore ID2, that's because I created that column. Then we're going to make it read only. This should be able to read it. Everyone else can be denied. Okay, save that. So what did we do there where we said ID? We're saying when the staff here, this ID, the whole record ID matches the actual ID here. And this can be deleted. We don't actually need this. I was just exposing that to show you. It just exists at all times. Every record has an ID. Okay, let's just finish all of this and then we'll just finish all of the rules. So with grants, we want a similar thing. With grants, basically, it's if the project is in the user.team project. So again, if the project being funded by this grant is a project that that user is in charge of, we're going to make it read-only. Otherwise, we're going to deny. So the rules are a little repetitive. In this case, they're not always like this. It depends on your use case. Recipients, I'm just going to leave as is. I'll show you why in a minute. Fund disbursement. With this one, we wanted to say basically that we want to do the same limitation where, let's actually do project first, where project is in user. You can see it starts auto-completing. Will be read-only. This one will be deny all. And I'm going to leave a little memo saying only finance team can update disbursements. And we're going to see what that looks like in a minute. Okay. So let's go through and view this as someone. So let's view this as Sandy. And hopefully I did everything correctly. And if not, that's why we have this view as before you share anything. Notice I didn't actually share this with Sandy or Wade. I can pretend they're in here. I can view things as them before I even add them. So I don't have to risk having messed this up before I check everything. So Sandy here is in nesting. She has one project, which is nesting. So the other one disappeared. In grants, same thing, nesting. She can see the nesting fund disbursements. She only sees the nesting fund disbursements here. If she tries to add something new, she should be denied and gets that memo. Only finance team can update. Bye, Eduardo. And then in recipients, I'm letting her see everyone's recipients, but notice what's happening on the bottom. She's only seeing things that are related to nesting. Otherwise, she sees nothing. So this is useful in case you want to share partners on the ground. You don't want to hide that from each other. It's still useful. You just want to share how the money moves because you don't want people getting, you know, how they get. But, and then there's Jill, who it does work in finance. She can see everything. She doesn't have any restrictions. She can go to fund disbursement. She can add a new fund. That's fine. She can delete things and edit it. And that's it. We did it. That was what I wanted to get to. There's a few bonuses if you want to stay on and go a little over, but that was the main things I wanted to get through. Structuring your data, relating your data, formulas. Can I edit access rights outside of the Grist? That's a good question. I'd have to double check, actually. I'm not sure. Yeah. I'm not sure if there's an easy way to do it. No, not in code view. Code view is just view. People want it to be edited, and so do I. It'd be so cool. Man, here's the dream, the nerdy dream. What if you could just like, in like some kind of command prompt, just create tables with columns, just kind of like type it out and it just creates everything for you without having to click on things a lot. That's the dream. Yeah. One thing I did want to show really quickly, it's as I started adding things, you might have noticed the amount budgeted exceeds the amount granted. There is a way to do conditional formatting. So under let's say I want to do a format where the row lights up in orange. Under table, you can add a row style that is conditional. So here I might just want to say if the amount, and it'll start autofilling. You see I did a $sign. As soon as you start editing a formula, $signs appear to reference which column you are using in your formula. So if the amount budgeted is greater than the amount granted, if that happens, then I want it to light up in orange. I did it twice because I kept adding stuff. Anyway, so it's just showing me when that happens. Okay, somebody has a question about formulas and data validation. Verify whether the data input into my tables by my employees is correct. Feasible to employ trigger formulas to establish the logic for data validation? Are there any potential pitfalls? Feasible to use trigger formulas to use that in many cases. I'd have to see your exact use case. This is a good thing for the Discord if you're in it or the forum. Sometimes it'll just do data cleaning. Like if you just want, like if they're entering numbers that it should be a phone number, it should be formatted a particular way, you can use data validation for that. I mean, trigger formulas, not data validation. If you want to like prevent someone from entering anything, by Sina, from entering anything until they have the correct format, you can kind of use access rules to do this. There is a word, if you search for that in our community forum, Let me see if I can find it really quick. There's a couple examples. There's a way I did it and a way Dimitri did it, which is a bit of a workaround with access rules. If you want to like prevent entry completely. The other thing you can do is use conditional formatting to basically light something up. Or I've seen people use trigger formulas where then if something isn't right, the trigger formula returns text that basically says that was wrong. So it lets them do it, but instead of showing the value, it replaces it with an error. So there's different ways to do it. Bye, Peter. Okay, do we have any other questions? All right, well, I think I'll wrap that up. If you do have more questions, go to our forum or go to our Discord. Bye. Thank you.